This episode of Accelerate is brought to you in part by Discover.org. Looking to close 4 times as many deals in half the time? Discover.org's industry-leading, human-verified sales intelligence gives you all of the data and insights like direct dials, org charts, planned projects, verified emails, and executive moves you need to stop wasting time on research and spend more time talking to the right decision-maker with the right message at the right time. Their team of 250-plus sales researchers do all the work so that you don't have to. 2,500 companies are already using Discover.org to win more deals. So check them out at www.discoverorg.com. That's www.discoverorg.com. It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 549 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record, where I hold in-depth conversations with today's leading experts in sales, marketing, and leadership 6 days a week. So join me on the show today, all the way from Australia, is Hugh MacFarlane. Hugh's the originator of The Buyer's Journey, author of The Leaky Funnel, and founder and CEO of Align.me. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about the investments you can make in your marketing team that will increase your revenues and really dramatically improve your close rates. And we'll talk about how the timing of making those investments in improving your marketing effectiveness also influence your ultimate sales attainment. So it's a really interesting conversation. Now, if you'd like to see the show notes for this episode, in case you're listening to the episode, missed something, want to go back, refer to it, go to andypaul.com/549. You'll get there your timestamp breakdown of this and all the conversations on Accelerate. And in case you missed it at the beginning of the show, this episode is brought to you by our great partner, Discover.org. The Discover.org platform is a game changer for sales, marketing, and staffing professionals. The feature-rich sales intelligence platform is supported by 250-plus researchers who continually update contact data and provide account-specific insight to help sales and marketing teams break ahead of the pack. So see the product live at discoverorg.com/schedule-demo. And over the last couple weeks, I've been talking about a new report I just produced. It's based on the input of well over 300 leading sales experts, people I interviewed right here on this show. And this report is all about what you can do to amp up and accelerate your sales right now. And so you might be surprised what these experts recommended be the first thing you should do to get your sales back on track. The report is free. Go to accelerate.fm/accelerate to get your copy right now. So let's get into it. Hugh MacFarlane, welcome to Accelerate.
You're very welcome, Andy. Thank you for having me along.
Well, thank you for waking up early on the other side of the world from where I am today. I mean, almost literally the other side of the world. I'm in New York, my New York studio today, and you're in your Melbourne, Australia studio or offices. So very early in the morning. Thank you for waking up early.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for staying late, Andy.
Actually, it's not even that late yet compared to some days. So I got a question for you, a standard question I ask all my guests to open the show. And this question is, in your opinion, what's the single biggest challenge facing sales reps today?
They very frequently will want to tell a story that the customer isn't ready to hear yet. And I mean that in a very broad sense. I'm going into a meeting right now. I'm a sales rep. I'm well prepared. And there's something I just really want to tell the customer at this time. Mm-hmm. Very frequently, we get that out of whack. And because our buyers are so self-directed these days, the numbers that get talked of often, you've heard them, you've used them yourself, I'm sure the 70% of the buyer's journey is complete before the prospect wants to engage with salespeople. If that's only half true, it's still an issue. And so the salesperson wants to say or tell something to the prospect that they're just not kind of ready for. And so the biggest challenge, I think, is knowing exactly what concept the buyer has right now, and therefore what I should be saying or asking in this meeting. I think that's our biggest challenge because largely of that self-directed buying.
So when you use the term concept there, tell us what you meant.
I'm stealing a little from Miller Hyman, the sales training company,
sure.
And conceptual selling. But basically, what's the idea they have in their head? Are they trying to make some improvement to their business? Are they trying to fix a problem? Are they trying to save their job? What's in their head right now? And what do I need them to have in their head at the end of this meeting? And whilst that's always been a challenge, an issue, a focus for salespeople, I think that the self-directed buying makes it a whole lot harder today than it was 15 years ago.
Well, and what particular part harder? Because this is, and I'll tell you why. Because this is a topic I've been working on recently.
The knowing. So your opening question was what is the biggest challenge that people face? And I think it's not knowing how to ask questions. We always needed to be good at that. It's knowing what the customer already thinks. If you go back far enough, I'm 55 and I started selling when I was 20. So I recall a time, this sounds like a real old guy now, but I recall a time not even that long ago where the font of knowledge was the salesperson, and the buyer kind of expected the salesperson to know more about the product than anybody else did, and that's how you got your information. These days, most salespeople walk into conversations where the customer knows more about the product and its use case than the salesperson does. And so clearly the role has changed. You've talked all that before. But I think the consequence of that self-directed learning, and forgive me, I keep using that phrase, but it is
That's
that
fine.
70% of the buyer's journey thing out. If that is so, then just knowing what I should be asking, knowing what is already known prior to the meeting, and salespeople often lack the signals that, frankly, we're going to talk about sales marketing alignment, I'm sure, on this call, but frankly, marketing ought to be playing a better role. I'll give you a real quick example.
Sure.
But should be playing a better role of helping the sales guy know what it is that customer is already thinking. Now, if there's any truth to what I said, that the challenge is knowing what the customer's thinking, then what signals might we use to work that out? And marketing doesn't know all of it, but it knows a lot more than it's telling. If you think about all the clever marketing automation tools that track what people have opened and clicked on and pages that have been visited on your website, marketing often keeps that a nice secret. That information ought to be shared with the salesperson. So sales guy going into that same meeting I talked about before, knowing that recently prospect Andy Paul has just been on these 3 pages and he's got 2 colleagues who've been on those same 2 pages on the website. I've now got a few clues as to what's going on, and Andy may not have declared that prior to the meeting. So marketing can help sales to know what's going on by sharing that knowledge, by surfacing that knowledge in the CRM.
Well, at least giving them signals that they can use to either confirm or not that is what the customer is thinking.
Exactly as you said it, Andy. It's not law. It's a good signal.
Right. So how do we make sure that happens? I mean, this is sort of the topic du jour. I was talking to someone even earlier today on another interview about this. Is how do we get this alignment to really take hold? And certainly we see sort of a forcing function of sorts as people start adopting more of the account-based marketing, account-based selling process, which dictates a certain degree of alignment if it's going to function well at all. But the world exists outside ABM as well. So how do, in your experience, how do you get customers, how do you get companies to align around this, working together?
When I wrote the Leaky Funnel, Andy, it was 2003, published 2004, and the journey described, as you know, you've read the book. It's a novel, and so it's the story of a CEO kind of trying to discover the answer to the question you just posed. And since then, the world of alignment's moved on a lot, but we've worked out through research a lot of things that alignment isn't. I want to start with those. The temptation is to do 2 things that don't help as it happens. One is to have the marketing guy carry a bag with the sales guy for a week to understand what it's really like in the trenches.
Empathy doesn't develop as a result of that?
They have some good beers.
I was asking it somewhat facetiously, but go ahead.
You bet. And I know where you're at. I'm going to give you an analogy for that in a moment that I find quite helpful, but I'll come back to that in a sec. So that's one temptation. The other is to have the sales guy sit in the crayons department for a while and play with pretty colors. to understand what happens in marketing. And I just think that we don't need to be each other. We just need to have...
not that you have a point of view based on you're describing it as the crayons department, but go ahead.
I'm cheating here because I spent half my time as a sales guy and half my time as a marketer, so I'm allowed to be rude to both. But the reality is that we don't need to be each other. We need to have a single process that has clear handoff. And my favorite analogy, I haven't yet found a way to break it, is the relay race, where the third runner doesn't need to run the race of the second runner. What they need to do is to be at speed at the time the second runner is petering out and have their hand kind of back behind them waiting for that second runner and just trust that baton's going to be passed. Mm-hmm. If that third runner is trying to run the race of that second runner and looking over his shoulder, he's going to be real slow when he takes off. And I think the same for sales and marketing alignment. It's about having a single process they built together. That's kind of key. I want to underscore that. Built the process together. So sales and marketing co-designed the process. They each know what the whole process looks like, and they're going to do their part of it. We looked at structure, what role that had. It had very little. We looked at spending time getting to know each other, and we found, this will interest you, Andy, we found that not only was that not one of the things that well-aligned companies had done, but in fact, the poorly aligned companies were more likely to spend time getting to know each other than the well-aligned companies.
Because
of the relay race analogy is
okay.
that it isn't about sales guy needs to know how to write a blog copy. Sales guy doesn't. Sales guy needs to know that if somebody's read 4 blogs and they've downloaded a white paper, that they're probably worth talking to. That's what sales guy needs to know. So, and to your earlier point, they know the signals that might indicate the conversation that ought to be had. That's what sales guy needs to know, not how to write the copy. Likewise, marketer doesn't need to know how to ask those penetrating questions, does need to know what issues should be surfaced with the blog that help the sales guy and what issues shouldn't be surfaced because sales guy says whenever we get a prospect troubled about that problem, the second one, nothing happens. When they get troubled about the first problem, happiness. So we need to understand the end-to-end process but not do each other's job, I think.
Well, and these turf wars are seemingly never-ending between sales and marketing, now customer success groups, and in some respects seem to be almost becoming more intense because, through automation and, AI and, the vast progression we're making with bringing more intelligence and analytics into sales, marketing, and so on is I think people feel threatened to some degree, right? And so staking out their turf and making it clear, how much of the revenue they were responsible for, sort of leads, at least I've seen, to more of this infighting, even though, again, you'd think they'd know that they work better together and get better outcomes together than separately.
We spoke a minute ago, Andy, about process. We looked at, in the most recent alignment study that we did, we looked at we looked at about 30 factors, but we found 10 worth talking about. Of those 10, though, there's probably 3 really, really worth talking about, and we've spoken already of one of them, which is process. And the notion there is a combined process. So I wanted to spend a minute on that process bit before we get into other pieces. There seemed to be, we looked in our first alignment report at about 1,300 companies. The more recent one, we had a deeper dive with a smaller number of companies, only 500 in the second study. And we found that there's a really linear progression. Companies typically embrace sales process first, then they'll embrace marketing process, but they'll be different. Second and different. Then there'll be a combined process, a single process that sales and marketing line up behind. That's the relay race analogy, I think. And then the fourth one, probably not surprising, is just an optimization of that single process. So getting really good data around what's working, what's not.
Well, let me ask a question, if I could, real quickly here is, so for people listening, what was the sort of firmographic, profile of the companies that you surveyed?
I referred to two studies, and the firmographic was a little different in the two. The first of them tended to be larger firms. I think average. Let me get the numbers right here. 1,100 employees, give or take. Mm-hmm. Second study, I think the average was smaller and the spread was greater. So the average was circa 500 employee companies. The spread was greater in that we had less concentration just around a theoretical mean. There were a good number of quite small companies. In the research findings, we stripped out those who had fewer than 50 employees. Mm-hmm. And we did that only because the topic is alignment between sales and marketing. And if there's two sales guys and one marketer, it's not that hard. It just gets hard when you got a few hundred sales guys and 20 or 30 marketers. So we stripped out the little ones from the study, but the demographic was more evenly spread. Geographically, we had a good spread. So I think we had a slightly disproportionate representation in the US, something like 30-35%, which is a little higher than GDP would warrant. But good representation through Europe, not a huge number in Asia, but the Pacific, where I live, probably represented about 15%, which again is disproportionately high, and probably just because our own list is disproportionately local.
Okay, so sorry to have made that interruption. So please go ahead with what you were saying before.
Yeah, it was just on process, Andy, that there is that linear progression, sales, then marketing, then together, then optimized. It isn't perhaps in itself that revealing. What surprised us enormously is what happened when you got better at process. We expected sales process to improve lead closure rates. So, does a sales guy get better at closing a deal if you give them a better process? You'd think. Does a marketer get better at creating leads that become more acceptable to sales if they have a process? You'd think. We found the flip, and I want to just dance on this a little bit because it's complicated. Sure. It's even confusing. Getting a good sales process did not increase lead closure. What it increased was the willingness of sales guys to accept the leads from marketing.
So, okay, before you jump on, let's unpack those then. So, as I was reading that in the report, I was, first question at camp is, well, why do you think that's the case?
If I've got a really good
process, in both instances,
and I think it does hold in both instances, Andy. If I've got a good process, I kind of understand more than one chess move. So I'm thinking about 7 and 8 chess moves. And if I'm thinking about 7 and 8 chess moves, I kind of know the edges of the world. I know the far left and the far right. I know the beginning and the end. And the beginning traditionally has been me tapping my network. I'm a sales guy. Me tapping my network for people to provoke a conversation with. Maybe these days the beginning isn't that. Maybe a good number of the prospects self-declare, and it's marketing who's handing them across to sales, we hope, for a good number of them. And so I'm more mindful of the whole process and therefore more willing to embrace leads. But particularly if we switch to the marketing process, if the sales guy respects the marketing process, and it's not just marketing bought a list, did something to them, and they handed me this spreadsheet and I had to do something with them. If there's more respect and more understanding of the whole process, then I'm more willing to jump on them. And I'll give you a quick example. There was a study published in the Harvard Business Review some years ago now, I think maybe 5-6 years ago, and it was called The Short Life of a Lead.
Yep.
And it referred very specifically to how quickly you need to follow people up. And the net is that if a prospect is self-declared as interested, sales guy needs to be on the phone right now. Like not tomorrow, not later this afternoon, but right now. If I'm a sales guy and I understand the whole process and I know that marketing's going to do these 5 things to get people towards our website, and on the website they're going to be offered this one really compelling marketers would call it lead bait. It might be an ebook or a video or a survey. It's some kind of cool piece of content that's relevant for our audience, and everything's going to lead to that. And when they've downloaded that, they're going to get this trigger email sequence of 4 emails. And the third one is going to ask this really tough question, whatever the question is. And then if they respond positively to that tough question, then they're considered a lead. Now, if I'm a sales guy and I know all of that, a couple of things are going to happen. One is that I'm going to read that asset clearly, because if the prospect's read it, I better read it too. I'm even going to put myself in that trail so I can experience those emails. And if they answer the right way to that third email, and we're being arbitrary here with emails, but the point is that there's some kind of magic moment where marketing says, if they do A, B, and C, then they're probably good to talk to. If I know all of that, then I'm going to know not only the topic of the conversation, but I'm going to know they're at their desk right now. And the fact that marketing just pinged my mobile app CRM and said, call this guy now, he just did X, I better call him right now. And so if sales gets the whole process, they're going to be far more willing to accept marketing's leads. And the flip is true for marketing. If marketing gets the whole process through to lead closure, it's going to start measuring closure rates, not just opening rates or lead rates or click-through rates. Like, which of these campaigns actually generate closable deals, and which of these generate just leads that are interesting but don't end up closing? Because the sales guys probably want me to do more of the first one and less of the second.
Well, their willingness to accept the leads is based entirely on that.
It ought to be. It ought to be. Marketing's willingness to pass the lead across ought to be as well.
That's where I was sort of interested in the data. So what you're saying is that the businesses that invest in creating the robust sales processes weren't seeing improvements in the ability to close, but we're seeing improvements in the willingness of sales to accept the leads. But it seems like if they're accepting these leads, that they're doing it because they see that they lead to closing deals. So I was trying to say, square that circle.
and I cheated by saying they ought, because we are all imperfect, and often a sales guy will be motivated by how close to closing the quarter they are, and a whole bunch of other factors that marketing can't necessarily influence. But to the best of our ability, if we've got a single process that marketing and sales kind of designed together, then it's kind of evident that marketing is going to work on leads that are closable, and it's kind of evident that sales is going to pick them up quickly when they occur. But when we looked at the processes in isolation, it wasn't that obvious to us until we unpacked it a bit, as you're doing in these questions.
Right. So, and again, just the last one on this one, because you had other data points I was interested in. So you're saying that building robust, what you found in the data was building robust marketing processes. You saw a 15% rise in closure of late stage opportunities, but you didn't really see that improvement through the investment in robust sales processes. And the trouble I have with a lot of data is we see correlations, but we don't really have a cause and effect. So it's like, okay, we sort of see these are correlated, but does it make it meaningful or not? And so I was really trying to dig to the bottom of that.
Yeah, and good point. And to be perfectly transparent, what the data told us and what we concluded later are drawn from separate pools. So what the data told us is there is a correlation. And there's a correlation equally with training, and that is that if you train your sales guys more than average, so average sales training in the pool that we studied was 4 days, what happens if you lift that to 8 to 10 days? Likewise, marketing, the average amount of training they got is 3 days. What happens if you lift that to 10 days? And training was kind of the same as process. What, to your point about correlation v causation, is that what the data said is that when there is more training present for sales guys, it tends to increase the probability that they'll accept leads. And when there is more training for marketers, then their willingness to create, or their capacity to create leads that end up closing, improves. That is the same data that we found about process. So process and training both drew the same data. What is the cause of that? We had to draw on our experience rather than the data to try and answer that. And our experience suggests that in both the case of process and training, the reason why investing more on the sales side increases lead acceptance rather than closure is that once I've got my skills, I'm a sales guy, once I got my skills to a certain level, pushing harder on training doesn't necessarily make me better at closing, but it might make me better at the whole process. Likewise with marketing, if I do a little bit of training and I have a little bit of process, then very probably I'm going to be okay at creating leads that get accepted because they're going to be in the right ideal client profile. They're going to be given to the right guy, all of those basic hygiene factors. But if we go harder, and again, Andy, to be transparent, the data told me that this was present, there was correlation. The cause is my experience rather than the data. But my experience tells me that the reason why on the marketing side, going harder on both process and training doesn't necessarily lift lead acceptance, but lifts lead closure, is because it makes me think more. If I'm thinking more about the whole process and I'm learning more deeply, I'm probably going to start to look at my campaigns more critically and say, gee, I've got 4 campaigns running them and one I'm running right now, and one of those campaigns is generating a whole lot of leads that the sales guys are accepting, good, but then they're not closing, evidently bad. And so as we get deeper into process and deeper into training, marketers think more about the closability, whereas in the early days, it's just around, can I get my click-through rate up?
So one of the questions that sprung to mind as I was reading this report about, the training increases the probability that the MQLs will close, is what sort of training is marketing getting?
Yeah. And we'll ask the same of sales as well, I think. We didn't find any reliable data. We actually asked that question, and the answers were not giving us reliable data. In particular, we were asking about the difference between product and process. A sales guy learns about new product. Is that training? I guess it is. Sales guy goes off and does a sales process course from, we mentioned Millihan before, them or one of the others. Different kind of training. We did ask those questions, but the data wasn't reliable. Yeah,
because I'm still, intellectually struggling with some of the data points, and so that's why that question sort of came.
Andy, I've got you at a disadvantage. I had 3 weeks to struggle with that data before I got my head around it.
Well,
when we found the conclusions, it floored us.
Well, yeah, because there's several things so one of the other things you found, or one of your findings, was that increased sales training also increased how much of your business comes from new customers or new logos, you said in the report. So again, that's sort of the question, what specifically were you training? Because, actually, you could make it a priority and give direction to your team without training them to focus on new business development versus, existing accounts, let's say. And you could potentially have the same effect.
Good call. And frankly, with a sample of only 500, you can get 25 of those 500 that did what you just said, and they're going to skew the data.
Okay.
Yeah. So we used the report, or the study and the report that we produced from the study, to raise a whole bunch of good questions to go explore. But we really have to, as you're suggesting, kind of dive into the individual company circumstance to work out what's going on.
Well, it's just, and this is not a criticism of the report, but a critique of the report, but it's just in general in sales now, we have greater transparency, more data available to us, either through research or just through the tools that measure what we're doing. And, my concern is always, okay, we have this data point, but what really does it mean? Right? I mean, somebody sent me an article today about the differences in close rates from female sellers and male sellers. And there's sort of 4 scenarios: women's salesperson selling to a woman decision maker, a woman seller to a male decision maker, male to woman, and male to male. And there was, differences between those, but okay, great. There's a difference between them, but it didn't say anything about what they were selling, what the price points were, was it enterprise, small business, who the customers were, and so on. So, the data didn't really, to me, it didn't mean anything, right? But we take those things, we tend to take them at face value, and suddenly the narrative is going to be that, a woman selling to a woman is going to be, you'll make sure it's going to be the highest close rate opportunity, and a woman selling to a man is the second highest. So it's like, okay, well, but is that really true? I mean, it may very well be true, but based on the data we're seeing is, it's just an example of one. It's like, and that's sort of just my cautionary tale about data.
There's that cautionary tale, Andy, with which I agree. There's another about the bias of the reporter.
Exactly.
The question structures. What I think reports like this, and we all get to see a whole bunch of reports from different companies, all of whom have biases, declared or not. In our case, we were specifically looking at alignment and what were the big lifters. Mm-hmm. And there are some questions that might have been interesting, but didn't help us get to that answer. And we're pretty confident, both from the data and our analysis of it, and just our experience. I mean, we've worked on something like 500 alignment projects now around the world, 20 odd countries. Mm-hmm. So not a small experience set to draw from. But even with all that, we're going to get it wrong. It's can we be asking the right questions, and can the data help us ask better questions? And I think what we've concluded from this is that we need to continue to get really good at getting sales and marketing and frankly, and finance and operations and customer support.
Right.
Getting them in the room together to design whatever their version of the process ought to be. So all the way from a name to a closed deal, what ought our process be? Mm-hmm. And you better get that built, designed, measured collectively. And that there's nothing in the data that gave me any disquiet about that assertion. I'm confident in saying that the companies that seem to have their act together on sales, marketing, alignment haven't tried to be each other. They've respected there are different roles and they're all key. But they did build and train against the process. They built it together and then they train against their piece of the process, mindful of the whole process. And they get in a room every now and then, whether that's monthly, weekly, quarterly, don't know, depends on the company. But they get in a room pretty often and they look at the whole end-to-end process mm-hmm. and ask, what's working, what's not? And they adjust the process together.
Right.
It's pretty hard to pick holes in that argument.
No, I don't think you can. So really the question for me that stems out of that is, clearly these organizations, didn't have a handful of people wake up one morning with this epiphany and say, oh, we should be aligned. I don't know if this came out in the data, but I've interviewed numerous people about this topic in the last years. What'd you find in terms of what the driver was to make that happen?
What's causing us to have to look at alignment?
Well, it's causing, a company to wake up one day and say, we're out of alignment, or let's get aligned, or the CEO says, this is, a cultural thing we need to make happen. I mean, what are you seeing typically as what drives it?
I don't know that I have a good answer to that. I think it's the same water cooler conversations that you've heard and I've heard and they've heard. Sales whinging about marketing, marketing whinging about sales. I mean, we work hard on marketing, but I'll give you a quick anecdote from our own work just recently. One of my marketers just threw her hands in the air at the end of a phone call and screamed at the top of her voice that they generated 15 leads for a pretty small company, and these were just beautiful leads. They were in the ideal client profile. Mm-hmm. They were unambiguously in a mode to talk. I mean, they declared that they were troubled about the right problem through their activities. They'd shown a high level of activity, and it specifically said, "I'd like to have a chat to that company." And the sales guys hadn't rung them because they were busy.
Or they were marketing leads, right?
Yeah. So, even in company, and we like to think that we work pretty hard at alignment between sales and marketing, and even in our own company and with our own clients, we see this behavior pretty often. So what is the driver for a CEO to want to spend more attention on it? I think it's people like you and I having this conversation. I think it's reports like the one that we referred to and others who have done some great work in arguing the case for alignment. I think it's those water cooler conversations. I feel like you'd need to be asleep at the wheel to not observe the disquiet that you referred to at the top of the call. Mm-hmm. And I just feel it's a logical response to that. What excites me is that the uptick for getting a single engine, a single machine, is real. We've seen lead acceptance go up by 30%. We've seen closure rates go up by closer to 60%, and we've seen the revenue that comes from new business lifting by 60% in businesses that planned their process and optimized their process together. Now, again, you may well raise the causation and correlation. I'm sufficiently confident that building the process together leads to goodness. The data certainly suggests it. Our experience suggests it, and so does your experience suggest that. And I feel like if we focus just primarily on designing, building, optimizing a great process that we all believe in end to end, that's really the primary focus, and the other things kind of become subservient to that, I believe.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, Hugh, good conversation. Thank you very much for joining me. We're running out of time here. So if you could tell people how to reach out to you, learn more about what you're doing, and as I said, connect with you.
Thanks, Andy. Probably the easiest way, we've created something for your listeners. They can go to Funnelplan, that's funnelplan.com/Andy Paul. So funnelplan.com/Andy Paul. And what we've put there is a tool that they can use to design sales marketing. The reason I'm suggesting that way to get in touch is because it's all a bit academic if we don't kind of have a clear process. And so what we've done is we put something on that at that link that will help them to build that clear sales marketing process together.
All right. Excellent. Well, again, Hugh, thank you very much. And friends, thank you for joining me today. Make sure you come back again tomorrow for another great episode of Accelerate. Until then, I appreciate it. If you get a chance, go to iTunes or any other place where you listen to this podcast and subscribe, leave a review for Accelerate. We want to hear what we can do to make this a more valuable experience for you. So thanks again for joining me. And until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.